Hey, everybody. In episode 6 of Sales Enabled, I'm speaking with Travis Carson from Kerage. I first met Travis at an offsite about 5 years ago where he shared a number of simple but profound coaching models that helped us all understand exactly how we were behaving under pressure and how we could each change individually to make dramatic improvements in our performance. Travis has been coaching the market for stars indicators and behavioral models for over 30 years, working with global companies such as Avis Car Rental, CBRE, the world's largest commercial real estate services and investment firm, Microsoft, and WeWork. And in this call, we get into a number of behavioral models, which are also attached in the show notes, so check those out, as well as talk about the underlying psychology and, more important, biology that explains how we all act under pressure. Outside of work, Travis is a keen family man and sports person, having been a nationally ranked tennis player and triathlete and completing 3 Ironman races, including Kona. And in this call, he shares the models that can be applied in sales, business, and sport to dramatically improve performance, especially when under pressure. Be sure to listen through to the end, okay? Because you'll hear about how you can access a free stars indicator report for yourself. But for now, let's jump into the show. Hey, Travis, great to see you again, and really excited for this show. I know we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of topics, dealing with pressure, dealing with people's apologies, but, really just want to say thanks for coming on the show, and great to see you again.
Absolutely, man. It's great to be with you. It's been a few minutes since we worked together, so it's awesome to be back in contact. So thank you for having me.
This world's small. This world is getting smaller and smaller by the day, I think. And so people just keep bumping into each other. I'm very glad that we get to bump into each other. I think I remember the first time that we met was in New York, and that you were part of an offsite that we were doing. And I know the one topic that we connected on at that point, because I was in training at the moment for some strange reason, was Ironman. So before we even jump into that, how's the Ironman career going? Have you officially hung up the bike, or the trainers? What's the deal?
It's so funny you say that. I officially am hanging up my bike. I haven't done it yet. I've had it in the garage, and I finally have decided it's time to take the chain off, get hooks in the garage, and make it more like a monument at this point. No, my many days are behind me now. I tell people I'm training for life, so.
That's it. I'm not fully retired from football. You guys know me. I play American football. I haven't retired, but I am in hibernation. I haven't officially hung things up. But no, you did quite a bit on the Ironman side, right? You did quite a few races.
No, I did. I got in. So I was a competitive tennis. So I've always been trying to be an athlete. Let's put it that way. So I was a nationally ranked tennis player when I was in my teens. I tore my rotator cuff, and so I got to college and needed something to get an outlet. And I started running and biking. And then I met a guy who had been a Division I swimmer at a different college, and had transferred to the U of A, and he became a good buddy. He was in my wedding and everything, taught me how to swim. So then I started getting into triathloning, and then for some reason I got into endurance triathloning and started doing half Ironmans and Ironmans. And I only did 3 Ironmans, but it was quite an adventure to, and what I always try to explain to people is, at least for me, I think this is a true statement. Ironmanning is something that you can only really see how it's going to go when you're doing an Ironman, because you never train for 12 hours at a pop. And so the only time you really know what's going to happen to your body is when you're out there for whatever it is, 12 hours. And so the first 2 I did, I had real problems. And so there was about an 8-year gap between my second and my third. And it was, honestly, Dan, it was like, I just have to prove to myself that I can run that whole marathon at the end without having to have major breakdowns. And so I did that. And then my wife and I had our twins, and that was kind of the end of the Ironman career. So. Yeah,
well, 3 Ironman is still, it's impressive. I did a half one last year, and that broke me. I remember I had a calf injury coming into it, and the 20 something kilometers at the end of the race, I remember getting there, coming off the bike. I hadn't practiced nutrition. I had no energy left in the legs, and I had to just plod around this course. And I remember this lady running next to me, bless her, keeping me company. And she said to me something like this. She said, "How you getting on?" I'm like, "I'm all right, yeah, just like kind of run, walk, run, walk." And I said, "How are you getting on?" She's like, "Yeah, I wasn't even going to do this. I didn't even really train." She was 60. She was 60 years old, man. She was just like, she left me for dirt. I'm like, oh. So, yeah.
What's true though about that is, in a way, it's a good. There are a lot of lessons, right? But it's a good lesson in life. Like you don't want to be doing those things with any kind of judgment, right? Yeah. Because if you don't race your race, I do know that I did Kona, which is kind of the big one. And anyways, there were people there that if you looked at me at the time and you looked at them, it was like, oh well, that guy, right? Because I was a pretty good athlete. And then we would be out there, and there were people passing me left and right, and I'd go, well, I need to keep up with that person. And then I'd look at my heart rate monitor and go, I'm not going to keep up with that person.
Exactly.
But the other thing I'll say too is it's a pretty cool community, and so
yeah, exactly.
Because I think everybody knows in that moment. Honestly, it is a little bit like sales and business. Like I think there's a respect factor. Because people know that you've gotten up and trained in the dark and, run in the rain and ridden in the wind and all that kind of stuff. So they're like, hey, you're here. So that's meaningful.
Yeah. You've put the hours in. I respect the athlete in you. Is it Ubuntu? I think there's a word Ubuntu. I think I need to look it up, but Google Ubuntu. I think it means something along those lines. I respect the warrior in you. But yeah, I love the community. I wasn't sure I could belong in that community when I turned up and some people's bikes were worth more than my car. That's always a good one.
It's an expensive sport.
Yeah, but I tell you what, though, you said the Ironman, obviously starting in tennis. I think one of the things that I've seen in business is sports people turn into pretty good business people. I think there's something similar in those two things, right? And playing tennis, doing the Ironman, but you also had business growing up. You've been a business person, you've been a salesperson, you've done that whole career, right?
Yeah. Well, so to your first point, I think there's a ton of layover. As a matter of fact, in the businesses that I did own, I would talk to people about, hey, we're going to run this business a little bit more like a sports team, just meaning that like hits, runs, and errors go up on the board. Yep. So you have to be open to feedback. You have to be somebody who's willing to give feedback. So high transparency environments, like, not trying to push everybody to love sports, but just that feel that you get. Because, most of the time when people retire from sports, what they talk about is, the locker room and the feeling of being in a community like that. So I think there is something that you can promote there. And I did. I had the privilege of very young, someone took a chance on me. His name is Randy Decker, and Randy took a chance on me. He had started a great business, and he gave me a sweat equity opportunity in business. And I was 22 years old. And so it was an energy efficient lighting business, so a construction business. And so, you had to get in there and you had to sell lighting, and then you had to do all the work to deliver on a project and do all the follow up in terms of proving that they had gotten the energy savings and things like that. And we did great together as a team, and then, getting out there. And so I was able to sell out of that business when I was 28. And then I've owned a couple of other businesses over the years, and, full transparency, why wouldn't I? But, one of them did well, and the other one in the great financial crisis did not do so well. And it was a real estate business, and I live in Arizona. Yeah. So I was right in the epicenter of,
wow.
And ended up losing a property to the bank. And that honestly has been one of the more important times in my career, was to go through that kind of failure where I had to call people and say we had lost their money, and the humiliation of that, and the understanding that I didn't die.
Yep.
And that you can rebuild in this game. And we'll hopefully talk a little bit more about that, Dan, for your listeners. That's something that we really anchor to, is the ability to play this game, not treating it like it's trite or insignificant, but just understanding it's not life or death. Because I will tell you, one of the biggest memories of my life is the day the bank finally took the property and it was over. I walked into my backyard and I kind of looked up, and the sky was still blue. And I can remember that very vividly, of like, oh, wow, I haven't even looked at the sky in like 8 months. So I'm not saying I handled it well, but I'm saying the perspective that I got from it has served me, I think, really well over time.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? In our darkest times, sometimes we have these moments of clarity that we always look back and go, and it's like a pivot point. It just kind of helps you realize something. So we're obviously going to talk about psychology, and you've dropped it in a couple of times. We're talking about the mindset and how we think about things. So just quickly, how did you make this transition from, athlete, business person? I'm gonna frame you now. People have this amazing athlete, business superstar to just psychologist, business psychologist. Do you have a phrase for how you talk about the work that you do in businesses?
Yeah, it is more towards coaching. So 0% trying to be argumentative, but I would not put me towards the psychology side. Coaching is more action based. And so whereas psychology is a little bit more, in my humble opinion, why are you doing things and what's the background there? And then coaching is much more like, hey, here's a framework, here's an idea, here's what you're trying to accomplish. Let's build some accountability around it. Let's go. So it's a little bit more action based. But so I'm more of a business coach, and we do training. So our business is called Kerage Unlimited, and it's all about being courageous enough to lean into challenging situations and come out the other side. The reason that I'm in this work is because when I was 19 years old, I met a man who changed my life. He was working with my dad. He was a business coach. And this was 32 years ago, Dan. I know I don't look like it, but I'm 51 years old. So this was 32 years ago. There was no business coaching industry.
Yeah.
And so my dad started making significant changes in his life. And I'll be honest about it. I mean, I've said this many times, and even my dad and my mom understand this phrase, but my dad and my mom did not have a great marriage. My dad divorced my mother. He also was unhappy in his business career, and so he left the job he was at, started his own business. A couple of very courageous things. Okay, just mapping it to that. But it was action. And it was after years of kind of, talking about these things, but making no changes. And so when I went to my father, I said, Dad, what has changed? And he said, well, I've met a business coach. And I will tell you, Dad, I was perplexed. I was like, what is a business coach? And why is it impacting your personal life? Yeah. And I think you and I both know that all professional development is, in fact, personal development. And so I went and met this man, and he started sharing with me what has become, the primary product that I use now, which we call the market force system. But at the time, he was kind of like a mad scientist. He was drawing these things on easel pads and dry erase boards in Arizona. And I was sitting there going, does everybody know this stuff? Like, this stuff's really good. And so, if there's one thing I feel really great about in my career is I anchored to that stuff at a pretty young age. And it really helped me. And it helped me in my first business, 22 years old, kind of starting to take over operations of a business and having a way to build common language, common approach, work myself through hard times, hard sales cycles, all those types of things, and help other people do it. And so in 2008, after that property went back to the bank, I decided I'd had some good things, some bad things. I had enough perspective that I felt like I could turn now to doing more training and coaching and helping other people.
Well, I'm glad you did. We've had a few sessions together over the years, and I can tell you that, and we're going to cover some of the topics today. Selfishly, I'm interested in recovering them, but I'm glad you've kind of leaned into that, and I know you've made a huge difference in the businesses that you've worked with. So, hopefully we get to share some of that today.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple of models, but let's talk about pressure. Let's start with pressure. And a lot of the conversations that everyone's having right now is about the economy, the challenges that people are under. We're seeing layoffs all over the place. We're seeing revenue targets from a sales perspective go through the roof. Salespeople are under even more pressure than ever before, and that's weighing on people, right? People are getting stressed out. They're trying to find ways of coping with it. Burnout's going through the roof. All of those things. So from a coach perspective, from the models that what's going on? How are you seeing the world and what's happening right now?
Yeah, no, it's I happened to be with one of the companies that was going through the layoffs last week. So it was Microsoft, and I happened to be on campus when the announcement was coming out about the 10,000 layoffs, and I was with the leadership team there that day, and it was thick as a brick. People are feeling it, and there's a lot of pressure in the environment. So a couple of things. I think the first thing is this appreciation that we did invent a game, and it's called business. And business is not a life or death event. So humans, when you think about it, are the only species on the planet that are not dealing in life and death 24/7. Every other species is dealing in life and death 24/7. So when you watch a show on Discovery Channel, okay, which I love those shows, like when you're watching those shows, I mean, it's just survival every second. Human beings are the only species that we have life and death situations. I recently had a family member diagnosed with cancer, and it's amazing how that'll shift your perspective as well. Like, holy cow, there are things more important than what I'm dealing with in work. And that, again, isn't to trivialize it, but it's to try to center people on, look, things are really hard, okay, right now in this game, but it is just a game. So one of the first things that I try to talk about with people is go, look, let's separate this from a life or death situation. And I'll share a little bit more about how we've studied on that, even from a neuroscience perspective, in terms of drugs that you want to be aware that are happening in your brain. But the most important thing that I try to share with people right now is, look, I want to acknowledge that it's really hard, because it is. But I also expect you to be great. And I've worked with a lot of people where, you know, what I try to share with them is embrace this. Like, the hardness of this situation could be, like, between COVID and what we're going through right now, okay, for salespeople, like the last, you know, say 5 years are probably going to be the hardest time of your career. Knock on wood, right? Hopefully. And so what I share with people is, like, let's not come out of this with you feeling a little bit like I did when I went through the hardest time, which I wasn't super proud of some of the things that I did, especially on my family side. I always felt like I handled it, the investor side, really well. Like, I was very transparent, really upfront, but I wasn't really present with my family, and we'd had our first baby at that time. And so, you know, it's something that I share with my clients out of, like, hey, be better than I was. Like, you want to look back on this hard situation and be able to tell yourself that you did everything you could to handle this with as much integrity as you possibly could have. Okay. And that's something that I try to live by, and I try to impress from a mindset with my clients. Acknowledge that it is hard, but also expect greatness. And I think if people can do that, that gives us a chance. Now, with what we're up against, Dan, and I think this is just, like, when I share this with clients, when I talk about it myself, when I've studied it with a professor out of University of California, Davis. So this isn't meant to be our perspective on the science. This is meant to be the science. And when there is pressure, the human biology does things to us that make things harder. And I think it's important for people to have, the way that we characterize it, is respect for that, especially right now. And so if you can think about it this way, our brains develop in 3 primary phases. And the first part of the brain development is very reptilian. It's called your amygdala, about the size of an almond, sits in the middle of the head, and doesn't have any language in it. And what's important about that is, without language, it has no rational thought and no ability for nuance. Okay? And its only job is to look for anything that looks risky. And it doesn't talk to you, it rattles. And it's got a direct connect to the second part of the brain to develop, which is called the limbic system, which goes down into your spine. And your limbic system controls bodily functions. And so when the amygdala rattles, it goes right to the limbic system, lights up the body. So, you know, when pressure hits, when the sales targets come out, those types of things, people may notice, your listeners may notice, like, their bodies get hot, or they can feel their ears get hot. Like, I have a client that says that I can't even feel my ears. They lock their jaw. But you want to pay attention, because that's your body now starting to react to the game of business like it's life or death. Third part of the brain to develop is the neocortex, human brain. And it is the one that has rational thought, and where we invented business and poetry and science and sports and Iron Manning and all the rest. And that's the part of the brain that we really work with people to keep engaged during pressure. And here's why, and then I'll stop, but I think this is interesting. You tell me, okay, the biology hits us with 3 drugs. It hits the neocortex with serotonin, which is a happiness drug, but it's a happiness drug, and how it produces happiness is through serenity. So it takes the human brain and sends it to the beach, and then it goes into the amygdala and gives it dopamine and adrenaline. And adrenaline is, of course, speed, and dopamine is also a happiness drug, but how it induces happiness is through pursuit. And so essentially what your body does to you, to me, to all of us under pressure is it goes to the most primitive part of our brain and says, do whatever you want, dopamine, as fast as you can, adrenaline, to mitigate the risk. And so the reason that this is important, I think, is that this is why I feel like a lot of people are going through a lot of burnout. Because COVID got us closer to life and death. All of us had a little bit more adrenaline and dopamine in our bodies. And then we've come out of that, and now there's a recession. So there's pressure again. So people's bodies are being hit with more and more adrenaline and dopamine. And over time, you can look, people can read about this other places, but there's a dopamine effect where it starts leading to literal burnout in the human biology. Okay. And so the reason I'm sharing that is awareness. And the awareness that we're looking for is just the choice to go, okay, this isn't a life or death situation. I'm going to keep my human brain involved here so that I don't just let my biology run things, because if it does, it's going to absolutely lead to burnout. Absolutely lead to burnout.
And this, actually, if we come back to this, I was chatting about this with another friend the other day. This is why exercise and workouts, even home workouts, are so essential, right? Because our brain, you're talking here, is wired to release adrenaline when we get a saber-toothed tiger or something like that, where it's hundreds of thousands of years old physiology that says, hey, there's a saber-toothed tiger, let's run. And so that's the reaction that we have under stress. Stress is a physiological response to a stimulus, right? And so, but in the past, we'd burn it off. And this is what I love. Have you ever watched ducks? Like, that's just a random thing, but have you ever seen ducks, like, they get into a fight with another duck? Parks in England, it's just a thing. Then the duck walks off, right? And you'll see this happen every time. You'll see the duck just do this little dance, like a really rapid dance, shakes his tail, like, to get rid of all the adrenaline. Apparently, that's what they're doing. They're literally dispersing the adrenaline and burning it off. That's why you never see a stressed duck. Apparently, I don't know. But this is the idea, right? Is that it's a physiological response designed to create a physiological adaptation. But stress has shifted for us from the body into the brain, and that stress response doesn't switch off. Right? It doesn't switch off. So we're continually releasing this physiological hormone. We just have no way of dealing with it.
Well, and that's right, because the amygdala, because it doesn't have any language in it and no rational thought, it has no ability for nuance. It will not distinguish between a business risk and a life and death risk. It can't. Both of those create the same biological reaction, like you're saying. So, targets come out, or, meetings going poorly, or whatever it is. Like, if we're not careful, all of us can get triggered. Our amygdala can get triggered. And the neuroscientists that we've worked with, what he talks about, and this is really important for salespeople, is a triggered amygdala will start triggering other people's amygdalas. So if you're in sales and you're starting to feel a lot of pressure, and we all know this, but the other, your client, your potential client is going to be able to read that. They're going to be able to see that you're not behaving, say, above your biology. That's how we like to characterize it, Dan. And what that'll start to do is trigger them. And now whatever you're working on from a sales perspective, you not only have whatever you're trying to sell, you also have an interpersonal issue. You also have something that's happening biologically between you and the person that you're talking to. So you have two extra problems. So that's why we really work with people to go, look, manage your biology, whether it's exercise, meditation, gardening, cooking, whatever it is, to kind of separate from the game a little bit so that when you can come back into it, you have perspective and you can begin to play the game above your biology.
Yeah, and I know we're going to get a little bit into the kind of market force style indicator later. And because I remember you talking about the under pressure, under stress, that people deal with that differently. And I think you said about going to the beach. I think that's where my brain goes a little bit, especially at the times of pressure. But, I think you also talk about, playing above the biologies. So is there strategies, is there tactics? What do you encourage people to do? Is there kind of plays that they can make to adjust to this?
Yeah. So, and actually you said it really well right there. Excuse me. What we tell people is really good players in business will be relying on their instincts. And a lot of people who get into sales and make it over time in sales, they develop great instincts for reading their audience and those types of things. But the best players that I've worked with, get above their biology and play from more strategies and tactics. So you think about it that way, that if you're playing from instinct, our instincts tend to be driven more from that survival response, which tends to produce more average salespeople, because survival will beget survival. People who are great in business start playing above that. And yes, we do use a particular framework that is called our income equity model. And it's exactly how people would think about it, except don't put it into like, do I have equity in the business and those types of things. Think about it more like mindset. So income is more your short term, things you need to get done for your job, your cold calling, your negotiations, trying to close deals, those types of things. But then your equity are more the longer term investments that you're making to enable you to both differentiate yourself and make more money down the road. And so everybody in business is playing an income equity game, focused short term and long term. But if we're not aware and the pressure picks up, there's more pressure in the income side. So people start doing more of the income related activities. So for example, at the beginning of COVID, I worked with a lot of commercial real estate brokers, and that whole world just froze. Everybody just put their pencils down because nobody knew what was going to happen. What I saw a lot of brokers still doing is making a ton of cold calls during that time. But there was nobody doing anything. And so it was almost producing more of an identity for them of becoming an annoyance. Like, hey, I'm not doing anything right now. Why do you keep calling me?
Yeah.
Right? Some of my clients, what we really focused on is, hey, the market is frozen. There's nothing we can do income-wise. Let's focus equity. And I'll share maybe some examples in a little bit on that. But just back to the model itself. Well, the biggest thing that we work on with people is being able to toggle between income and equity activities, not pitting them against each other. Because if you pit them against each other, income activities always win. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the short-term pressure, the firefighting is always the one that people are going to default to, right? Is if there's a burning issue, I'm going to go and deal with that. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Biology will go there every time, okay?
Yeah.
And so getting above the biology, we are very, how would I say, like we're demanding, if you will, on our clients about managing their time.
Yeah.
Because the way that you can work against your biology is to really look at that resource and how you're investing it. And so we use a really simple model. It's red, green, black. And basically you start looking at your time through the lenses of, is it red, meaning is it more administrative? Is it more like things that, for a salesperson, maybe filling out expenses, HR, IT stuff that you have to do. You have to do it. It's foundational. Okay. But we characterize that as more red time.
Yeah.
Green, color of money, is more your income activities. And the way that we characterize that, Dan, is we say anything that's going to lead to revenue for you as a business person, as a salesperson in the next 6 months. There's no magic to that, but we just kind of characterize short term as 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay. And then black time, of course, being in the black in your business is equity time. So it's invested time. And so we characterize that as things that could help you 6 months and out. So everything should get back to helping you make more money, but it's just the timing of it. So green is in the next 6 months, black is 6 months out.
Yeah. Because what I'm noticing at the moment, and I don't know if you're seeing a similar thing with the situation as the economy's in it right now, people are just looking. The attention is narrowing. I think it's just like, what can I do right now? And that's probably, there's an element of the biology and kind of the stress on the moment and trying to perform in the moment, make sure people can see I'm valuable, don't fire me, that kind of fear mentality. But also I think it's, people aren't looking beyond 6 months. People can't predict beyond 6 months. Yeah. And so I guess in that situation, like your real estate brokers, they're just thinking, oh, what can I do now? What can I do in this now to seem more valuable, and not necessarily thinking further down the line. So, there's obviously a time management balance, and it's, people have to, I guess awareness is number one. Like, can you be aware that you're just focusing on right now? But is there some, can you give me some examples? How have you worked with people to, yes, appreciate there's a short-term need, you need to focus on the green, but you also need to be considering black and what comes next. And, you and I know that this isn't going to last forever. Something's going to come next, and there's going to be sunshine at the end of the rainbow. Is that too many metaphors? But you know what I mean. There's going to be good times coming again in the future at some point. So How should people be thinking about it? Give us a couple of examples, or at least ways that we can think about building for the future potentially.
Sure. So the high level answer is that, especially with salespeople, what I work with them on is 15% of their time going into black, going into invested for the future. Yeah. So 15% is a real number, is 5 to 6 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And so what we start working on is, okay, let's start time blocking calendar. Okay, right click, change the color to black, start getting it in there. Okay, just to start getting the mindset that when you look at your calendar, you see that you have some invested time coming up. One of the first things that happens when people start doing that is it reduces some burnout. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's important for long-term play, especially in sales. Secondly, you know, I can give you some very specific examples, and I will. The couple examples that are really, really good, going back to the beginning of COVID, market froze. One of my top real estate clients, Richard Schwartz out of Newport Beach, basically what he and I talked a lot about is, hey, nobody's doing anything. So why don't we start building some relationships with other brokers? So he's an industrial capital markets, industrial buildings broker. Mm-hmm. And so what he did, and this was not something that the company endorsed, okay, this was his idea. What he did is he started reaching out to about 10 other brokers in markets around the United States that might ultimately be able to refer clients into his market. And he knew that he would have potentially clients going from, you know, Newport Beach into other markets. So it wasn't just looking for referrals to him. It was also looking to give referrals out. So he created his own little network of 10 people selected and told at the beginning, like, hey, we're getting into this to start, you know, building trust between us, getting to know each other really well, and ultimately to try to drive business to one another. And so they started meeting on every other week. And what they would do is just kind of go around what was happening in their markets. You know, was anybody seeing any movement yet? And then as the momentum built, they started, they brought me in. I talked through the income equity model. Okay. They brought in like an outside speaker like me to, you know, give them maybe some frameworks to think about. And then what they started doing was bringing in clients. Each one of them would bring a client in and just talk to the client about, hey, in a normal market, what do you look for? In this market, what's going on? Like as much as they could, you know, share from the client, which was great exposure for the other brokers to be meeting, you know, some of the top industrial clients, if you will. So it was creating relationships all over the place. Well, here we are, you know, whatever it is now, Dan, 3 years later, that actually, just show you this. So they even put some identity to it. It's called the Heroes, powered by Colliers. So they put a little identity to it. They meet on a regular basis in person, you know, play a little golf together, those types of things. Anytime there is a company conference, they'll get together, and they start each meeting now with gives and gets. You know, who has referred something and who has gotten something. And so it's a very kind of wide open environment like that. So what that does to me is it's pushing them all to think longer term, build more relationships with one another. And we all know in sales that the best way to sell is to have somebody else sell you, right? Is to get a referral. And that does not happen without investing time and energy to build trust. Okay. That's why traditional networking doesn't work great, because nobody has a relationship yet. These people invested the time to build the relationship so that the referral network would build.
I love that as well. And like relationships, I have to say, it's not my strongest point. Like I'm good at it. I can build relationships, but working on them over time is something I really need to focus on. And it's funny, right? Because I think this does that. You know, they're building it. Yes, they're going to get some joint ventures, but I think there's a couple of other things that you put in there. And you know, you're talking about trust. You're talking about actually building authority as well. And you know, if you're in that small group of a association. Like people are going to look at you as the people. And I think you've said in the past that's now its own association. People look at that group and say, hey, can I be part of it?
Absolutely. It's an identity play. A big part of, equity is building your identity over time. You know, how do you intend to be seen by clients? And if you're calling people when the market isn't moving, you're going to build an identity of being quite annoying. If you're inviting maybe a client in who might want to go into some different markets, and now you're giving that person access to meeting brokers that might be able to help them. You're also building your own, relationship with this person and those types of things. but you're building more of an identity of being an advisor, a partner with that person. So a big part of being in sales is what identity do you intend to produce? And most people, because they're just being drawn by their biology, are building more of like I need something right now. I'm very transactional. Will you do a deal? They're not building an identity of, hey, I'm going to be a partner for you for the long term.
Yeah. And I think this, and we talk a lot with SDRs and things like that. SDRs having to hit those targets, make your calls, send your emails. But instead of it being, how can we do a deal? How can we do a deal when there's no deals going on? It's how can I add value? How can I build a relationship? How can I invite you to this event that we're running? We're bringing all these people together to talk about the problems, right? And let's just talk about it and let's solve some problems. Yeah.
Yes. See, that was the other example I was going to share is this one is not, COVID or even that recent. This one's probably 7 or 8 years older now, but it's still going where one of my clients did exactly what he said. He said, you know what, year end, I think a lot of my clients just kind of want to get an idea of like, where do we think, okay, as the salespeople in this market, like where do we think the market's going in the next year? So at the end of the year, they did, what he called, this gentleman called a peer equity play. He invited, 50 clients to his office, 10 came. Okay. It wasn't a very big, outpouring in the beginning. And, they just sat in his conference room and he had a little food. But the only thing that anybody was not allowed to do was they were not allowed to talk about any deals, like any live transactions. It was all just long term. Where do we think things are going? Building a relationship. It got a little word of mouth. So literally the next year when they did it, it was so big that their office was crammed. So the next year they had to move it to the Portland Athletic Club.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And then the next year after that, they started selling tables. Selling table, and they took the money. They didn't take the money for themselves. They took the money to bring in an outside speaker. So it wasn't even them anymore talking about the market. They brought in, a big economist or something. And then, of course, they would take the proceeds and they would donate it. So they, have the photo op with the big check that they're signing over to, the Boys and Girls Club. And again, like that is an ongoing event done in Portland. And it's so big now that, they live stream it. And so it's really turned into something that is a massive differentiator for this team, okay, for this, business development brokerage team inside a larger company. And not things that was coming, that were coming top down from the company. It's the innovation that's coming from people who go, hey, I'm a business person. I can think through an equity lens. I can think about the things that are going to differentiate me.
I love that. And, I was listening to something the other day about adding value to the community. That's what we need to be doing to build. And you talked about image there or identity. It's about going and adding value, becoming the person that you want to be seen as and doing the things that those people do and adding value to the community, whatever the community is, whether it's real estate, whether it's a location, a geography, whatever that community is.
Well, see, and there you go. Okay, so if we go back to above biology, see, our biology has an intention, and it's to survive. And so if you listen to that intention, it will drive your behavior. I have to survive. Where's my next deal? All those types of things. Yeah. When you start going through your neocortex and you realize, hey, this isn't a life or death game, and I can control the identity I want to build, you can start coming from a different anchor. You're not coming from survival anymore. You're coming from something that is, whatever you want it to be. You and I are pretty, like-minded. But, to me, it's about being more of like that advisor, partner with people looking to add value. I have Denzel Washington's quote, don't aspire to make a living, aspire to make a difference, up on my wall, those types of things. And even if that's not what people want, what we encourage people is don't just let it be a survival response. Have it be something that you're actually choosing, that you want to anchor to, not just this idea of, the next transaction in front of me, because that will inevitably lead to burnout. And that's the thing is a lot of my coaching clientele, Dan, has a profile. They tend to come to me. They're more on the business development or leadership side, and they have a very particular profile. They're 37 to 42, and they're completely burned out.
Yep.
And they're starting to go, holy cow, look, I've been doing this, and I think I'm pretty good at it, but I don't enjoy it like I used to. I wake up, I'm exhausted. And so a lot of my work is trying to pull people back from that kind of survival, everyday edge. Even people who have made, a lot of money, if they're not careful, they're still running from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes work, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of the people you're talking to with professional development, thinking differently about things. It takes, all these investments that we're talking about to be somebody who is literally and actually playing the game above your biology. And most people are.
So how do I find out? Because, and obviously we're going to, let's transition into indicators now. I've studied, I remember the first time I did a psychometric profile, so Myers-Briggs, it was maybe 20 years ago as part of my neuro-linguistic programming training. And I was like, there's no way you can put me in a box. Can't put me in a box. Did this test, I was in a box. That was me. I was like, the box knew me better than I could possibly know myself. It's ridiculous. And, and since then I've done things like DISC, and, these are great psychological tools. They're great communication tools. But like you said at the beginning, you're a coach, you're interested in action, and your specific action is focused on business. So talk to us about the market force, the styles indicators. There's different profiles in there. How does that help me understand, my tendencies, and how can I use that to predict burnout, or at least recognize the challenges that I'm going to face?
Absolutely. So, yes, we have our own version that, at some level competes against DISC and Myers-Briggs. I'm very biased. Okay, so I will acknowledge that. But what we really focus on are moments of truth, that those pressure moments, making a good first impression, getting somebody to have a meeting with you, making that good first impression in the meeting, negotiating with them, closing, working through breakdowns in, when a deal is maybe going a little sideways. Those are the moments of truth in business. So ours is very tailored to high pressure. It's a 10-minute little test, 20 questions, goes like that. And we're looking for those instinctual answers, trying to get closer to that amygdala response. So we're worried less about personality. We're worried more about biology and the things that happen default-wise. The reason that's important is that if we're unaware of how we respond to pressure, we start to treat everyone how we would want to be treated under pressure.
Yeah.
But in any of these psychometrics, there's typically kind of four main categories. And so if you just take the numbers on that, Dan, if you're treating everybody how you want to be treated, you're going to be right 25% of the time. And that's not enough to be great at sales.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
The importance of the appreciation is just to go, oh, there it went. There's my default. There it comes. And then the ability to go, well, what's actually required right now in the game? How can I actually play above this? Again, using that idea of above biology. So we use it for kind of a journey of self-awareness, okay?
Yep.
And the example I use there just really quickly is tennis. I had a great tennis coach. I switched from one to another when I was 16, and it was my first experience of like really great coaching, because it wasn't just the skill of tennis, it was the mental side of tennis. And he sat me down at a restaurant when I was 16 years old, sponsored, nationally ranked tennis player, and he goes, hey, what kind of tennis player are you? Are you more of an attacker or more of a counterpuncher? And of course, my response was, don't try to put me in a box. I can do it all. Just like you said, Dan, like that's the reaction. And he goes, well, but if you really look, Travis, in your heart of hearts, which one is more of your primary? I was like, I don't understand the question. I can do it all. I'm talented and all those types of things. He goes, well, I've been watching you for a month. And when the match starts out, you can do it all because you're not under as much pressure. As soon as the match gets tighter, you start backing up.
Yeah.
And he goes, you're a natural counterpuncher. And of course, my reaction at first was, well, that's bullshit, right? Like, still fighting it, right? And then in my next match, there I was, like in a tight, score. And I was like backing up. And then I had the self-awareness to realize I was backing up. And what that did is it gave me a way to manage it. So in our journey, back to my little thing, self-awareness, number one. Number two is self-management. The ability to kind of go, oh, there it went. Now let's have some tools for playing above it. And then the situational flexibility, situational awareness to start going, well, what is my opponent doing? Or in business, what's my client doing? And then the situational flexibility to do whatever the game requires. So the joy of getting it in, whether it's DISC, Myers-Briggs or ours, I hope it's ours, but if people will engage in that, the reason you do it, ironically, is at first the reaction is, this is going to put me in a box. But if you really invest in it, what you realize is, no, it's trying to open the box.
Yeah.
Because once you have the awareness of what you do naturally, you don't have to do it.
Yep.
But most people are just so consumed in that moment. Their biology is just taken over. I always describe it as they're just along for the ride. And that's why they wake up, they go to new jobs, they go to new places, they have the same problems, they have the same issues with the same types of clients. All of it is repeating because it's all a lack of self-awareness. Does that make sense?
And this, and even having studied this stuff, it was that when we had our first session together, and I'll share because I don't mind, and people will see this a mile away anyway. But I remember having that, going through the profile, coming out with my mind, and I was like, okay, that's me. It's pretty good. But then it was when the pressure got applied, and I looked back at the things that had happened in my life, and it was, when you have those moments, the dull moments. And you look back and you're like, that explains everything. And for me, when under pressure, there's a tendency for me, I think, is to go to the beach guy. I'm that. I'm like the escapism element of, how do I get out of this situation? Because that's the biology play. And actually, when you said that, I'm like, oh man, the amount of times where, maybe not every single time, but I should have stayed and stuck at things a little bit longer as opposed to running. And actually, had I done that and chosen to stay in those moments, how would I behave differently? And so that for me was a huge realization. And one of the things, and even just knowing that now, I can choose my own adventure, right? So
there will be some times where you might go, you know what, I am going to get out of here. But at least in that moment, it's a dignified choice that is being made from an anchor. It's not just biology. It removes a little bit of like this afterwards kind of victim response that I really push my clients to not have, that you want to be making choices. Like, business is not an easy game, and there are no answers in the game. There's no answers to what people should be doing with their equity time. By definition, if there are answers, it would be easy. And a decision is not an answer. A decision is made without complete information. Not every equity investment that people make pays off. But you're doing these types of things to try to learn, get better, push yourself, all the things that make a great salesperson. That, again, if your biology is in charge, your biology won't do that. It'll keep you small because its only job is to keep you alive. It's doing its job. It's our job to get past that.
I love that. And, this is a game. I know it sounds crazy, and I know that in this moment in time, it doesn't feel like it. It feels like the world is collapsing.
Yep.
But it's a game. It's a game. Travis, this has flown by. Oh my goodness, we need to book this in again. This has been so much fun. Hey, listen, I know you got a generous offer. I know, the stars indicator for me was eye-opening. I know you want to extend that to other people. So how can people find out more about you, the work that you're doing with Kerage? How can they find out more about you?
Yeah, so Kerage is spelled with a K, Kerage. This is my liquid courage in the morning. So it's kerage.com, Kerage. And what we'll have people do, we'll have your listeners do, is they can reach out to you, Dan, and if they'll give you their email address, then we can set up style indicator tokens on our side so that they can bypass the $40 fee. And we're happy to do that with no other, obligations or anything. We don't even use the information to go back at people or anything like that. It really is a give. And it's something that if people find value in it, let's talk. But hopefully, like you said, it just creates a little bit of conversation, even if it's with yourself, or share it with someone else and go, hey, does this look like me under pressure? And start working that direction. So we're happy to make that available. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to send you our income equity model, very simple PDF that, maybe just provokes some ideas again for people on how to think about the time blocking, because we're very rigorous about that with people, especially at the beginning of a coaching engagement. Because I will tell you, I don't have any clients, and none of your listeners right now even have time to listen to this, because I don't have anybody that ever calls me up and goes, hey, I've got extra time. All of this is about making it, finding it, being disciplined enough to get it in there.
Yeah. So. And most of the people listen to this on 2x just to squeeze it in.
Yeah,
so
a little bit of time, and I totally respect it.
Well, Travis, it's been so amazing. Thank you for the reminder. That we are playing a game that our biology isn't the best indicator of what's going on, to think about how we can spend like that 15% equity time, I think is reasonable, even if we're very short-term focused. And just the ideas on how we can build our own image, like internally and externally, and just some great ideas. And yeah, all the things that Travis talked about, they'll be in the show notes, so check those out. Travis, so much fun as always.
Thank you, Dan. It was a pleasure. Good to see you.
Likewise. Okay, guys, so you just heard an amazing offer from Travis, and I can highly recommend you getting a copy of the Market Force Stars Indicator. As I mentioned in the podcast, for me, loads of realizations. Even though I've done lots of psychometric profiling before, the Style Indicator really does open your eyes, especially in a business context. So, if you want to get your hands on a free Stars Indicator, do one of two things. Either go to salesenabled.com/bonus, and there'll be a sign up box there. You can just pop your email address, and anybody who signs up on that box, at least in the first 25, I think we'll go for the first 25. Leave your email address and we'll get you a free copy. Or if you want, if it's easier, then just drop me an email, info@salesenabled.com. That's info@salesenabled.com, and just say Market Force Style Indicator or something similar, and I'll reply and we'll get you access to that. You'll also find in the notes the resource mentioned, so the pressure model, the income equity model. Make sure you download those and refer to those. Great resources. But if you want to get hold of the Style Indicator, then salesenabled.com/bonus or info@salesenabled.com.
You know what I think, Ron? I think that was a sales call. Good job, buddy.
So you're going to buy a subscription?
No, I already get the Times.
Bye-bye.